Hello and welcome to another edition of the Darshan Project. In this lecture, we're going to be looking at Muhurta, and this is basically a tool in Jyotish, and actually a whole branch of Jyotish, dedicated to finding the most auspicious time to start certain endeavors. There is actually a portion of time called Muhurta, which has a little overlap, but this is technically a its own branch of astrology, and it has many uses, and we're going to get into it here. It's one of my kind of holds a soft place in my heart. It was the first thing I learned when I started learning Jyotish from my first teacher, and so I've had a lot of experience using it over time and have seen the results, and I think it's really one of the more practical things that, people who don't read charts and do things, it's one of the more practical things that you can take home with you and really start to apply in your daily life with astrology to help you kind of mitigate some of the hurdles that you might come into from day to day and have your life be as smooth as possible, and over time see the effects of these things when you put it into action and use it for selecting timings for different things. So to look at some of the basic ideas around Muhurta is it's really meant to help, once again, mitigate any kind of negative effects for whatever kind of undertaking we want to do. And this can be for the positive or the negative, so that you can choose muhurtas to go to war, for example, if you're a nation or a king, or if you're trying to defeat an enemy or go to a battle, you can choose a good muhurta for legal issues too, which I actually have used this for that. So with great effect. So there is it's not just positive, where I want to or what's assumed to be positive. Let's put it that way. I want to get a lot of money, or I want my marriage to go well, which is all part of it. But it just whatever endeavor you can think of, you can use this knowledge to instigate that. And it's used in tantric practices. If you're doing specific tantric practices, you need to have some knowledge of this in order to undertake the proper time for certain practices. And if you're doing general yogic practices, you often say Tithi and Vara names and different things in the beginning of traditional mantra practices or pujas and things like that. So it has a wide range of effects, but it's very practical and useful. And one of the big things with it, though, is that it can't override the birth chart. So you always have to go back to the person's birth chart. So even if you pick the best possible muhurta for, say, starting to write a book, or getting married, or trying to have children, any of these things, if the birth chart doesn't really support those kind of activities, I don't care how much you sit down and try to write a book, even if you picked a great muhurta, if writing isn't in your chart, or fame, or more importantly, if the right dasha cycle isn't coming around for that activity at that time, then the results aren't going to fructify. So you do still need a reading from a Jyotishi, or from your own knowledge. If you're already in a field of work, for example, and you're already doing something, then you can use this for certain endeavors if you already are a writer, for example. But it all gets tapered back to the birth chart. So don't think just because you picked this muhurta to do this activity you wanted to do, if it doesn't work out, there may be other mitigating factors preventing you from doing such. So you can use it for big events, like marriage, like writing a symphony, taking initiation from a guru, any number of things. You can pick those events, but it also has a lot of day-to-day application. People pick muhurtas to go shopping or get their hair cut. So it has even mundane levels that can be useful, and you don't need as many details to apply those general muhurtas and still get effect and see effects with them. So just a really important point to keep in mind as we get into this information. And once again, as I've already covered it, it has a wide variety of uses, as I've mentioned, and you'll see this in all the ancient shastra all the time. There's, good times for the first haircut on the child, uh, first time for the child to leave the house. Uh, so many different uses for this knowledge, and while that's good and it's applicable, it's important not to get obsessed with it. This it's a really easy trap, especially with this field. I think Jyotish in general, it's easy to get obsessed and start seeing everything through the chart and the movements of planets and kind of get stuck in that mind frame, which is really really limiting after a while. But especially with this, a lot of people who maybe have had some setbacks in their life, and which is generally people who study a lot of Jyotish, there's a certain fear that comes up in them, and so you may overuse some of this knowledge and try to pick the perfect timing for all these little actions you're doing, and I fell into that trap when I first started learning the stuff, and and part of it was a learning process. I was just trying to see how it was working and what the effects were in different circumstances. So at first, it may be useful to kind of get into it just to really understand the movements of each of these things. But over time, don't get trapped in that where you won't leave the house without uh, planning out every sequence of your day based on the muhurta. It's okay to get a general feel, in the morning for where the planets are and everything, so you know what to expect. But just be careful of not getting overly obsessed with what's going on here. Except for when you have major life events, then it really, really pays to pay attention to all these details that I'm going to get into. Just a little overview of what this this course is going to cover. First, we're going to look at the Panchang. So, Panchang, as we covered in our previous lecture, I introduced you to that within the framework of more of looking at birth charts and reading the Panchang elements from a birth chart. And those still apply a lot in the Muhurta. And Muhurta is, in general, based for the most part on the movement of the moon and the placement of the moon, and the Panchang elements, which combines moon sun kind of placements. But it's really the Panchang that sets the basis for picking a good Muhurta. And so we're gonna focus a lot on that and those 5 different elements. So like I said, you've already become familiar from the last lecture. If not, go over those elements, understand the rulers of the different divisions, and because it's going to be really useful segue to come into this to help understand applying it to Muhurta and picking auspicious timings, and that's the basis of Muhurta. And the basis is this idea that just like the birth chart, that kind of sets the tone for anything to happen. So the idea with the Muhurta is, if you pick the beginning of an event to have the best possible, planetary influences, then the rest of that event will unfold to its highest capacity. And a saying that's often quoted is, "A job started well is a job half done." And so that's the idea behind the picking these muhurtas. And sometimes, coming in line with that is you might have to wait. When the right time could be very strange hours. So people who rely on this, I've seen, sometimes marriages, they get married in the middle of the night because that's the best muhurta to get married at, 10 p.m., 12 p.m., all sorts of strange timings. Or you might have to wait, 3-4 months to start an endeavor because that's a more optimum timing. And I've given muhurtas to people, friends and things like that, who have been heads of organizations or moving into houses, and they there's a tendency to want to push things on a certain schedule for a lot of reasons. And I've often warned people to not for various placements, and they don't take this information too lightly. And I've seen time and again where they have a lot, and I've seen the muhurtas that they've chosen to go with without considering things at all. And I can just see that you can see the obstacles just lining up one after another based on it. So it might seem insignificant, but it's actually really useful in planning your day-to-day activities. So We look at the Panchang elements. We'll go into various yogas, and these are just how these different elements line up. So how different tithis and different nakshatras and days of the week, how those line up, and there's a lot of mitigating influences to where even though in general sometimes may not seem good when certain influences align, just like in a birth chart there's certain yogas for planets and houses and things like that. Within the elements of the Panchang, certain things line up either for really positive indications or also really negative indications. So this can really help you avoid some hiccups when you're looking at timings. And they're once again, they're specific to the Panchang, and a lot of them I haven't seen in a lot of places. I got this from teachings from my teacher, so these are some nuggets that I'll be passing on to you that I haven't come across readily out there. So really useful information. And then after that, we'll look at specifically the Rashi chart and a little bit of the Navamsha to see how to fine-tune once you get a date based on the Panchang and these different yogas we're looking at. Then you want to pick, a certain ascendant and specific time within the day with which to undertake your endeavor. And there's a lot of different little factors that get into that, but at this point in the course, you've got a grounding in the birth chart and everything. So this is gonna bring some of that information into this picking of times and round out the Muhurta knowledge as well. And from there, we'll go into, once again, some more special factors and considerations to take into effect with these. So there's lots of little details. And the basic idea is there's lots of overlapping energies and patterns. And you're never going to get an exactly perfect Muhurta where everything is just green light. We're going to go through a lot of different options and different patterns, and the basic idea with picking the time is you pick the one where it's the most positive influences that are going to garner the most strength for the specific event that you're choosing. And so there's a lot of things to take into consideration, and along with that we'll look at specific things that also are more useful within kind of day-to-day planning, where you're not going to look at all the planetary placements and the Panchang placements, and we'll just look at some knowledge where if you need to pick a time to do something really quickly within a day or a couple days during the week, you can quickly pick a time that might be more conducive to what you're doing. And those day-to-day things too can be even one more layer you can put on top of choosing the Panchang information, but it won't be as crucial if you're taking care of what we looked at previous. And from there we'll look into specific situations, so commencing an education or starting a new business or taking a medical procedure. We'll look at some specific indications that are good for those specific activities, because there's lots of details when you really want to hone in on something very important like that to take into effect as well. And one more thing to make sure that you've got that best time to start your endeavor. And lastly, I'll give you some practice to do and part of some work so you can check up to see how you're doing, see if the information is making sense and you're following along. Now, before we get going on this, in order to do this, either you'll need some type of software program. J-Hora is probably the best free one out there for Jyotish, well known. Sri Jyotish Star has a really nice function where it can generate the Panchang for you, and there's also online some places called like mypanchang.com or Jurik Panchang. So there's some free online websites that also give you the Panchang. Or a lot of times if you have a local Indian community, there's also oftentimes local Panchang makers that can make Panchangs local to your time zone. So the Panchang has to be as close as possible to the city you're at, because it's very, like anything in Jyotish, it's location specific. So if you don't have some of those softwares, You can look on My Panchang is good. They have a nice tabular format for the Panchang, so it's easy to see all the elements kind of laid out there. And just and so you're going to need to get some type of some type of reference material for this to uncover, which shouldn't be too hard. But just one thing to note is usually in the Panchang, if you look at like mypanchang.com or the Panchang makers, usually they list when you're looking at the yoga of the day or the nakshatra or all these different functions. Usually the time listed for those is the end time. It's when that specific item ends. So it's not when it starts, which can be confusing for some people. So watch out for that and make sure you're reading the chart clearly. Double check with your software if you need to, or you can double check with me if you need to, but just make sure you're reading those charts clearly because they can completely throw you off. It's not that hard once you get the hang of it, but just keep in mind, usually it's the end time that they're listing there in those. So those are the basics. And the first thing we'll look at is the durations of these different elements. So as the focus will primarily be on Panchang, Vara, which is the day ruled by Agni, is 24 hours. So that's basically based on sunrise, sunset times, which we're all very familiar with. And these other elements have various times because they're based on that movement of the moon in relation to the sun, most usually. So there is some variation in there, which causes a lot of shifting over time for all these different elements. So it's not, a steady set cycle. So you're going to see, and it's important to keep that in mind when you're looking at these times, so that that they will shift into different kind of patterns over longer courses of times. But the Tithi is, roughly 19 to 26 hours. Nakshatra varies 21 to 27 hours. The yoga 20 to 25 hours, and then the Karna is set at half the Tithi. So that one's a little different, but still an important aspect of this. So just a general idea to keep in mind. You don't have to necessarily memorize all this, but just an important idea if you're new to this, that the Tithi is not always going to align in the same way with the day, or the nakshatra won't align in the same way. So it's going to shift around quite a bit. So the first element we're going to look at is the Vara, and this is basically the day of the week, and it's pretty straightforward. A lot of people may have heard about how the different days are ruled by the planets, and so the malefics rule Sun, Sunday, Mars, Tuesday or Mangala, and Saturday is Saturn. And the benefic days, Monday ruled by the moon, Wednesdays ruled by Mercury, Thursdays Jupiter, Fridays Venus. So these are straightforward days. Generally, you want to kind of avoid any auspicious activity that you're going to start on Sunday, Tuesday, or Saturday, and you tend to want to do good works on Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday. Now, there is some caveats in this, so this doesn't mean Tuesday is totally out or Sunday. So the malefic days do have some purpose. For example, Tuesday with Mars can actually be a really good day for you to accept a job. My teacher said if you were ever offered a job on a Tuesday, just take it, because that gives you a lot of Mars power, a lot of force behind you within that company, within that position. So it is tweaked a lot, but as a general idea, that's a general idea, and we'll get into more of those specifics as we go along. But just a kind of a thumb rule. When you are picking a specific Muhurta, you're going to want to choose that day based on the Naisargika Karaka of the planet. So basically that means whatever endeavor you're looking to undertake, you want to see that that planet is somehow associated with the endeavor. So if you want to do something with learning, for example. You might want to pick Jupiter. If you were going to study yoga or Vedanta or something, Jupiter would be a really good day to start that. My astrology teacher always starts his courses on Thursdays, for example. If you're looking for something romantic or with your spouse, Venus is a very good day for that. So this is a kind of a basic push, and it has some overlap in the next slide we'll look at with the nakshatras, and which will help you kind of fine tune the specific activity. And really, since we're looking more at the moon placement here, you're going to want to favor the nakshatra placement a bit more for the specific activity. But if you can overlap that similar energy for whatever event you're undertaking with the specific Vara that corresponds to it, that's good. If not, you still want to try to get one of the more positive days for your specific event. And along with that idea, make sure that day lord isn't opposed to the natural signification. So if you do want to do something romantic, then Mars is not a good day for that. Or getting married, generally Saturday, not such a good day to get married, even though most people do it. And the troubles that ensue, and divorce rates, maybe one indication of how this knowledge is not being really looked at properly. But you want to make sure that those significations are in line. I have some notes on here about the doshas of the day. We're not going to worry about that too much. You can fine tune some things with that. But in general, a dosha is a fault or an issue. So generally, the day strong rulers have a dosha on their own days. If there's the night strong planets, they have a night dosha on those days. So just something to fine tune. And then the Vara can oftentimes suggest, just as when we're looking at the birth chart, it can suggest your longevity, your general status of energy, health, and all that. When we're looking at an event, it might suggest that staying power for whatever the event is. Once again, it's just another detail. The Vara will subsume a certain place below the nakshatra and the Tithi when we look at putting this all together. So it's only one consideration. So keep in mind as we go through that, these are all just many different overlapping energies we have to put together in order to make work into the one unit. That's why if you see the image for this talk is this ball with all these different colors, this gives you a solid idea of how the Muhurta is working. And you got that nice yellow kind of popping out in the middle, which just gives that good general direction, that auspicious direction with which to undertake the activity. So that's a general gist of it. So the next element we're going to look at is the nakshatra, and this table is a really, really crucial, important table for you to understand. As you can see, we've taken the days of the week, I put those on top, and they are associated with certain energies. So Sunday is a fixed energy, Monday is more movable, Tuesday is more cruel, Wednesday is mixed, Thursday is light, Friday soft, Saturday is very sharp. And so if you are choosing a day for a certain activity, you can look on this list as well and look below there on the bottom for an activity that kind of aligns with those energies if you're doing a general one. But more importantly, those energies are associated with the nakshatra in the second list. So, for example, Rohini is a more fixed nakshatra associated with that kind of Sunday energy, right? Shravan is movable, and Dhanishta, all those are movable. Tuesday, Purva Falguni, Purva Shada, Bharani, Magha, those are more cruel nakshatras. Kritika, Vishaka are more mixed. Hasta, Pushya, Bijit, which is a special nakshatra we'll talk about, is more associated with Jupiter and Thursday and these light energies. And so and so on. You can look at the list. So when you're choosing an activity, this is generally how I start. Is I kind of look at this list to get a general idea of the nakshatra in operation, and it gives you an idea of kind of the events that are actually going to unfold with the muhurta over time, and it gives a very strong coloring to the whatever event, or even just the day. Every day there's going to be some nakshatra in operation. And so just looking at a panchang from day to day, you can see, oh, this day might, bring up some challenges in general. And, it all gets tied to a lot of other elements. But, it's a good general thing to kind of look out for as you go day to day. If one day might not be good for shopping or getting that haircut. So it's just a general way to kind of get a feel for what's going on for that day. We have a note on the bottom to avoid the last 48 minutes of Ashlesha, Jeshta, and Revati, and the first 48 minutes of Ashwini, Magha, and Mula. This is a Gandanta point. This is that point where it's changing over from the water and fire signs, so you have to be careful. So just pay attention to those points, especially Jeshtmul is probably one of the strongest, most malefic placements, because the moon's also gets debilitated in that area. So you want to watch out for it. And you can, and over time you can see how certain energies also interact with yourself. So for example, I mentioned that Jeshmul placement, and without fail, in our household, and it's some weird mixture of me and my partner's chart and everything, but whenever just Shmuel comes around, our energy just gets completely zapped, and it's been like, it works like clockwork. It's just really interesting thing to work. And so a lot of you can pick up on a lot of little things like that about different patterns in your life if you start paying attention to this. And we've actually learned to time it. We will oftentimes just going out along our day, I may not be paying attention to the Panchang for a while, and then we'll just get zapped, and we'll just say it must be Jeshmul, and every time that happens we check, and sure enough that's the placement that day. So there's lots of little things like this, and especially for newcomers to this information, it's very strange, but the more you get into it, the more you see how it's it's a general kind of template for how things are working out. And there's a lot of factors, but there is a lot behind it the more you get in touch with it. One last note too on this list is this is kind of just a general idea. So these aren't the end all be all of the activities you can do on this list, but you need to extrapolate, and you need to kind of reflect on the own activities that you're undertaking, which and you want to pick a time for that, time that's good for that. Over time you'll get a feel for it, and it can be a little tricky, but just use these general indications and see what fits best for what you're wanting to do. And once again, don't get too obsessed with it, and if it is something super super important, then you can go to a professional and get a professional muhurta. The next element we're going to look at, which is very important, so usually the nakshatras, the first thing I look at, the Tithi is generally the second thing I consider, along with the day of the week is kind of third in there, but always in the back of the mind. But Tithi is super important. It's the lunar day, and this is I'll have to explain this list. It's not all laid out here for you, but you can see that there's Nanda, Bhadra, Jaya, Rikta, Purna Tithis, and these go in a loop. So the first one's Nanda, second's Bhadra, then Jaya, Rikta, Purna, and then it repeats, so that the sixth Tithi is Nanda, seventh Bhadra, eighth Jaya, ninth Rikta, 10th Purna, and so on. And so these go for the Krishna Paksha while the moon is waning, and they repeat again while on the Shukla Paksha when the moon is waxing. So it's important to get a feel for the Tithi and the movement. And you can see below the Tithi number is which ones are considered auspicious and inauspicious. So the most auspicious is the Akash Tithi, Akash ruled by Jupiter, that element's ruled by Jupiter, most auspicious. The medium ones are Vayu and Prithvi, which have an okay relationship with water, because remember the Tithi element is ruled by Jala. And then the Rikta and the Nanda are the most inauspicious. If you, Agni and water, that's a Gandanta, so that's fairly inauspicious. And then Jala, there's too much water there, which is perhaps part of the reason why it's considered the most inauspicious of the Tithis. So you can use that kind of as a gradation. And the most important thing on this chart, and really handy when you're trying to pick out good times, is these days. So Friday for Nanda Tithis, Wednesday for Bajra Tithis, Tuesday for Jaya Tithis, Saturday for Rikta Tithis, Thursday for Purna Tithis. So whenever these days line up with these Tithis, this is called a Siddhi Yoga. So Siddhi, means accomplishment or powers in yoga. So this is it mitigates all the negative effects of the day. So, for example, if it's a Rikta Tithi, if it's a fourth Tithi on a Saturday, even though Saturday is considered a malefic day, even though the fourth Rikta Tithi is the most inauspicious Tithi, when those line up, it's actually quite the opposite. All good works that you want to undertake on that day can be accomplished. So this is one of the many kind of overlapping functions where you can pick a Saturday, for example, to start something, or if it's Jaya on a Tuesday, right? Good Tithi, Mars, so day. Those good works can be accomplished, and so it can mitigate a lot of negative effects for the day. You still want to, use some discretion. For example, it would definitely be a good day to start a court case on a Tuesday with that. Whereas if you could find a Siddhi Yoga to get married on a Friday, might be a better choice, just to line up all those elements. But these things can help. So something to keep in mind. Some notes on the bottom, once again, to consider the movement of the moon. Generally, you want a waxing moon is ideal. The stronger moon is better, and it usually gets stronger past the fifth Tithi. So after this first round of Tithis, that's when the moon really starts to gain strength. Before that, it's considered a little bit weak. I have here from Krishna 11, so the last round of Tithis on Krishna Paksha to that fifth one on Shukla are pretty weak. So you generally want to avoid those unless the event's not so important or there's other mitigating factors. But if it's really important, try to get a strong moon. Just as I mentioned before, with the Gandanta points on the nakshatras, Tithis also have Gandantas, so you need to avoid the last 24 minutes of the Purna Tithis, the last ones in this group, and the first 24 minutes of Nanda Tithis. So once again, there's that junction point between the Tithi cycle here that you need to watch out for. Along with that, you have to be careful. It's called a Kashaya, a missing Tithi, or Vriddhi is an extra Tithi. So because these things don't always line up, sometimes you're going to have a Tithi that spans a whole day, or sometimes you're going to have multiple Tithis changing in a day. So ideally, you're only going to have one Tithi change in a day, but anything else that's generally considered inauspicious for the day. So you just want to watch out for that. Is another small consideration, but still important in important events. And last thing is the Tithi Lord can suggest the prosperity or the difficulties during the event. So, while the event's going on, anything that may come of good or problems that may come up is associated with the Lord of this. So you might want to check the Lord as well, see how it's placed in the chart. a little more detail than you need if generally if you can pick a good Tithi, even a Siddhi yoga, then you've got a good start on picking your day. The next limb is the Karna, and this is based on half a Tithi, so it's pretty fixed to the Tithi, and suggests if the Tithi was the events and the prosperity or difficulties as the events going on, this Karna suggests what's finally going to come fruition from that event. Generally, you want to avoid these Shakuni, Charushpad, Naga, and Kinishtagna. These are the Karnas. These are those fixed Karnas, if you remember from the previous lesson, that are associated with that Amavasya moon. And so generally you don't want to do anything around that time, unless you're doing some weird tantra, and that's not, I'm not teaching that type of deeper esoteric knowledge here. Generally, these other Tithis is what's coming up. You can see here, Bhava and Balava have those starred. Those are generally the most powerful, most auspicious of these Karnas. The other ones, except for Vishti, which is ruled by Saturn, possibly Mars could create some issues, but generally those other Karnas ruled by the benefics are better choices for your Karna. But this is something that it's kind of a secondary function of the Muhurta, and once again you do want to consider it and more important things, just to make sure you're not getting your new moon or this Saturn. So if you can mitigate it to get a positive influence, particularly the planet that's in line with the the Karaka of your event, that's ideal. But don't freak out so much about this, especially if you're finding a good nakshatra, a good Tithi, a good day. Some of these other factors, the charts are lining up, then perhaps won't be as crucial, but definitely still take it into consideration as you move along. And finally, the yoga, and this specific one, if you remember, this is the Akash element. So Akash brings things together. So this really suggests the relationships with people, or how well events are kind of brought together within whatever you're choosing your Muhurta for. So this limb becomes really important with Muhurtas where large group gatherings are involved in, for example. So you might want to pay a little more attention on this one if you're going to say, have a parade, or you're organizing a conference or something like that, and you want to make sure everybody's getting along. Then you want to pay a little more attention to each of these. And I've just given the Sanskrit names in here, and they all have different translations that will give some insight into what they mean. I'm sure you can Google it and find details on all of them. So if you want more insight into them, and I think I gave more information in the last lecture as well on this, so look into that if you want deeper details and the different kind of energies each of these yogas are bringing. But what I've done here is I've just starred the tricky ones, the negative ones. So for example, number 10 is Ganda, which is a knot. Ati Ganda is similar; it's a smaller knot. These are tricky energies to work with. So you want to avoid these yogas as much as possible when you're choosing your Muhurta, particularly in those important ones where lots of people and things are coming together. I've put a question mark on Vajra. It means thunderbolt. Different authorities have different takes on it, and so you just be cautious around it. But it can be considered negative and overpowering at times. So just as an overview, I know that was a lot of information to throw at you in a short amount of time, but I've giving you these slides, so just take notes on them. And it really comes down to working with the stuff over in time. I don't expect you to memorize it, so you do want to have some of the stuff as a reference when you're going through and picking your time. So don't feel overwhelmed, but you get a Panchang, you pick a date, and you kind of go through the process. So once again, I've been talking about this, but consider, what activity you want to do. Consider, what nakshatra is fitting in with that. If it fits with the energy of that, then try to find a Tithi and, a nice strong moon. Consider, that moon sign, so Scorpio is a debilitated moon, which could bring in some tricky energy, depending on what you're bringing in. So you want to check, what house, if that's supporting you, who's ruling the moon, if that planet's supporting the activity. Especially on important events, you're going to want to check your birth moon, which we'll get into. So right now I just looked at all the general patterns where you can pick a pretty good date and avoid a lot of problems just by what we've shown so far. But we'll get into more when you get into very specific dates. Your birth moon will come into play. And then you can also look, once again, at the day in operation, to see if it lines up with, based on that nakshatra chart, see if it lines up with that, and after that, consider the Karna and the yoga as to end up with the nice detailed Muhurta. And if you've got all that going for you and have some pretty good times, you've got a lot. It's really hard to get all those factors matching up. So. And it takes a little bit of work. I'm not gonna lie. At first, it takes a little bit of work to figure this out. But like anything, you get the knack of it and looking it out. But Jyotish is not, it's not. It is hard work. People don't realize this a lot of times. It takes a lot to, especially with picking a time. And if it's one person involved, that's okay. But once you get two people involved, or businesses and some other things, and then it gets really complicated. So. Start simple for yourself and see how it's working. Once again, good days. We outlined that with the Varas. Good general nakshatras I've given. Good Tithis, difficult Tithis. Good Karnas. The bad yogas. Avoid those. One point here: Jupiter and Lagna. So if you've got all these different factors in line and you don't know the specific time of day to act on at any time, if you can generally put Jupiter in the Lagna, as long as it's not, debilitated or weird factors. Even then, it still oftentimes will bring some protection in general. But Jupiter in the Lagna is a really good blessing. It aspects 5th and 9. It gives a lot of protection to some crucial points in the chart. If not in Lagna, if it's in Jupiter and Kendra, it can also be really powerful. So that's just a general easy thumb rule to pick good muhurtas if you're in a pinch, or if you don't want to, don't have time to go through all these details. Just a good general way to mitigate negative effects. Once again, a reminder, avoid those Gandantas. They are around. And then the moon is best alone. So ideally in these Muhurta charts, you don't want planets with the moon. Even good planets, even moon with Jupiter is not always good in a Muhurta chart. So ideally the moon will not be influenced. Definitely not with a malefic. Will hurt the Muhurta. So and ideally, when you do look at the chart of the moment, hopefully the moon is not in 6, 8, or 12, which are some of the difficult houses. Especially avoid that moon in the 8th house. And, and also watch out for like Papakartri, where there's 2 malefics on each side of the moon. Things like that can have a strong influence. So, nice moon all alone, they're uninfluenced. Also, be careful with heavy malefic aspects on the moon, things like that. So it's pure, as clear as the moon as you can get in the chart as possible. And you can't always get it perfect once again, but whatever you can do is going to help you line up your best chart as possible. So that's an overview of the general principles for Muhurta. And even with that, once again, even if you can get all these principles down and working, you're gonna be able to avoid choosing a lot of bad times in your life, especially without this knowledge before. Like even something as simple as, say, buying a piece of electronic equipment. People often get duds or problems with their equipment, so you have to, picking a nice muhurta, if you're going to buy a big stereo system, can ensure you're going to get the proper one. And I've actually used this for things like that, and I've seen, sometimes that best muhurta may be weeks away, and then I wait, and during those few weeks I find out a bunch of information, and I may buy something different, or things may change, and then I might pick the right purchase for my choosing. And sometimes choice of error, there's other factors, and I buy the cheap one, and of course it's no good. But you do your homework, but it can make a difference. So even these basic indications I've given. But from here we're going to go on to more details in the next lecture slide on really fine-tuning all this to pick the best possible muhurta for a specific event.